Hello and welcome to Project Justice. I am Mutaba Omoran. Nigeria's fight against corruption has been a front burner issue through successive administrations. It's no surprise then that it formed a major thrust that powered President Muhammadu Buhari into office. First among things done by the president was to set up a presidential advisory committee on corruption. Next was to forward some anti-corruption bills to the National Assembly. What followed was a robust campaign of arrest and detention of alleged corrupt persons. Most of those arrested were detained for weeks or months before even being charged to court. Many, though, have yet to be charged. Among the high-profile arrests and or investigations are those involving serving judges, both of lower and superior courts of record. These include two Supreme Court justices, namely Justice Sylvester Nguta and Justice Iyan Okoro, 5 Federal High Court judges, Justice Adeni Ademola of the Abuja Division, Justice Muazu Pindiga of Gombe Division, Justice Yeladzira Nganjua of the Yanagwa Division, Justice Ofili Ajumogobia of Lagos Division, and Justice Mohammed Yunusa also of the same division. A number of state High Court judges were also either arrested or facing some form of allegations that required further investigation. Now let's find out how many have so far been charged to court. Only Justice Nguta of the Supreme Court has been charged and facing trial among the Supreme Court justices that were arrested. And among the Federal High Court judges, only 2 have so far been charged. Justice Ademola, who recently got his charge dismissed, and also Justice Ofili Ajumogobia. A couple of other High Court judges are also facing trial, notably former Chief Judge of Enugu State, Justice Innocent Umezulike. The question is, what happened to the others after over 7 months of post-arrest investigations? The past 2 weeks have also witnessed a flurry of decisions against the anti-corruption agencies. The case of Justice Ademola was struck out with heavy chastisement by the judge, Justice Jude Okeke. Also, EFCC's freezing order on the bank account of human rights lawyer Mike Ozekome was lifted with damning rebuke by the court, as well as that of former First Lady Patience Jonathan. Is this chain of setbacks indicative of shoddy investigation, frenzied media trial, poorly conducted prosecution, or even, as some have said, a judiciary out to protect some of their own? So disturbed has the government been of the recent failures that it convoked an emergency meeting on the outcomes, with the president immediately demanding a report on the so-called recoveries made so far. So, was there really a well-designed strategy to the anti-corruption war, or was it merely another noise-making, out to impress, and usual fire brigade approach to things? I sought the view of former General Secretary of the Nigerian Bar Association and former Chairman of the NBA Abuja branch, Afam Osigwe, on these. But first, let's take you through top stories in the judiciary landscape.
The Chief Justice of Nigeria, Justice Walter Onoge, has re-echoed the willingness of the nation's judiciary to support the ongoing anti-corruption campaign of the Buhari administration. Justice Onoge spoke to journalists on Tuesday, shortly after he held a closed-door meeting with President Muhammadu Buhari at the presidential villa. The arraignment of the former governor of Benue State before the Federal High Court in Abuja has been stalled due to non-service of court processes. Justice Gabriel Kolawole, who presided over the trial, ordered the prosecution to serve Suswan through the legal department of the State Security Services and adjourned the suit to May 11, 2017 to enable the prosecution put its house in order. A Federal Capital Territory High Court in Abuja will on June 8 rule on the preliminary objections brought by the Nigerian Bar Association presidential candidate Joe Gadsama in the 2016 election. The application is seeking to set aside the swearing-in of the 15th president of the association, Abubakar Mahmood. But Mahmood urged the court to strike out Gadsama's suit for want of jurisdiction. Malabu Oil and Gas Limited has asked the Federal High Court in Abuja to stop the federal government and 6 others from signing the final investment decision for the 13.5 billion naira Zaba Zaba deep water project. Malabo is also seeking for an order of interlocutory injunction to restrain the federal government from considering to revoke the reallocation of OPL 245 granted it. Justice John So granted Malabo's application to serve court processes on Shell Nigeria outside Abuja jurisdiction.
You're still watching Project Justice. Coming up next is our featured interview. Does the anti-corruption campaign have a carefully designed strategy? Afam Osigwe shared his views with Project Justice. Thank you very much, Mazi, for agreeing to speak to us.
Thanks, Utibe.
Let's have your evaluation on the government's current anti-corruption campaign.
Well, my evaluation of it, in a summary, is that it's a very laudable fight by the government to rid the society of, or alleviate corruption, or reduce corruption in the society. But I'll have a different view about how the fight has been carried on in recent times. But the idea of the government making it a principal focus of this administration is highly commendable. But a lot more could be done to make that fight worthwhile and achieve greater results to reduce corruption in governance and in private life in the country.
What, in your opinion, is wrong with the procedure?
I think lack of proper investigation, prosecution not being carried out properly in some instances, and then what people may call the lopsided nature of the investigation or the targets of investigation would appear to be a blight on the otherwise good result that would have been achieved, or the good perception that people would have had of the fight against corruption by the present administration.
But there are people who would say, even though critics have said it's lopsided, it's one-sided, there must be a starting point.
Now, a government requires on a positive perception by the people that the fight against corruption, or indeed against any crime, is even-handed, that it does not single out any segment of the society. Now, no matter how good and laudable that fight is, once it is seen as a witch hunt, as a fight only intended for a certain class of people, or people who do not belong to a ruling party, then the fight has suffered a major setback, because people, even where rightly secure convictions, people would never believe that it was rightly deserved by those to whom it is handed down to. So there's every need for a government to be even-handed, not caring whose ox is God, who is involved, but investigate corrupt practices at all levels against all manner of persons without fear or favor. I think that's the best way to describe it, so that because the government needs a positive perception by the people about the genuineness, the impartiality of the fight against corruption to sustain it.
Is it really possible to separate politics in any campaign such as this?
Oh, sure it is. Now, if you allow bodies set up to investigate these matters, to do an independent job without the presidency or any arm of God, the executive dictating to them who could be investigated, or you're being told that the EFCC chairman went to brief the president, or maybe the DSSS getting involved in circumstances you think they ought not to be involved because they do not center on the main functions of the DSSS, and doing things in manners that suggest that things other than noble objectives of fighting corruption are involved, then you defeat that aim. But in a nutshell, it can. I mean, if I take a quick example of the US, where even people who are linked to the Trump administration are being investigated, irrespective of the fact that they are close to the president. The FBI is doing a job, and the Department of Justice is doing the same thing. We could have the same thing in Nigeria. We don't even need to refer to these people to know that we can do the same thing. Even if you're the president's right-hand man on Man Friday, you should be investigated. And for as long as there is a lackluster attitude towards investigating, for example, the Secretary to the Government of the Federation, and quite a number of people whose names have been linked to one corrupt practice or the other, for so long will people believe that the fight is selective. Like the senator from Kaduna said, look, that when it comes to the executive, it is deodorized. And people will always get away with that impression that there's a different law for members of the ruling party or those who are close to the president, and a different one for those who may be termed opposition or those who are not friends of the administration. We've seen a number of cases which has fallen like a pack of cards in the courts recently, and the EFCC and other prosecuting agencies seem to have a rethink over these setbacks which they have suffered.
What could be responsible for this, in your opinion? Because I've also heard in some quarters people saying, for instance, that one that has to do with the judge that has just been acquitted by the court, that it's the judiciary trying to protect one of its own.
I mean, it's laughable, and I'll say it with every sense of responsibility. When in the course of your investigation, you find out facts that defeat charges you're bringing against a person, and you insist on bringing those charges, then the case is bound to fail. I understand that the federal government will do the charge against Orubebe because they discovered that the money was alleged to have embezzled or misappropriated was actually not taken, but was still in the coffers of the government. This is an honorable way of doing things. If you find out that your allegation in first cannot be substantiated in court, then why prosecute? For example, when you made reference to Justice Ademola's case implicitly. If, for example, in treating his case, the same government found out that he received a legitimate income of $520,000 from the late father's estate, and the same government goes on to prosecute him for having money he cannot account for, and then the same government in the SSS, in the course of investigation, discovered that the case he is alleged to have received money from to give favor to the third defender, that's Joe Agiesien, that the order he made in favor of his client was actually set aside some days after the alleged money was given, then it didn't make sense charging him with those offenses. You mustn't, because you have to show the public that you're having a fight, bring every matter to court, and then let it go to court and fail, so that the suggestion will be there that the judiciary is protecting itself. Like somebody said, dogs do not eat dogs. That's not the case. Courts deal with facts. And if you follow the trial, like I believe you as a journalist did, most people left with the impression that this matter was not going to go beyond a no-case submission. Because if you follow the cross-examination of PW16, the SS operative who testified, it was obvious his evidence exculpated the defendants, and he was bound to fail. And the court was right, in my opinion, in upholding the no-case submission. Bottom line is, if there are facts that exonerate a person, no matter how much you have hurt the person or damaged the person's reputation in the media, we shouldn't be in any way. You should be honorable enough to say, we do not have enough facts to proceed with this trial. There's no need to bring charges. And it doesn't make you less an honorable government. It doesn't make you less determined to fight corruption. And which brings me also to the issue of sting operation. In sting operation, you get the evidence and strike to catch the person with an act of committing the crime or with the evidence. But in this case, even though the operations were tagged sting operations, no evidence emerged in the course of trial to show that there's sting operation. And do not forget that till today, Justice Enyan Okoro remains on suspension. No charge has been filed against him, and yet his reputation was damaged in the media. That's what we are talking about. When you sting, it will be such that the person caught will not have any doubt that a conviction is certain. And maybe that's where plea bargaining could come in. But where you just run into a place and start fishing for evidence, and then because you have made so much noise in the media, you must charge to court, your cases are bound to fail. You must do proper investigation. You should not be based on conjecture or speculation. Courts deal with facts, not whether there are suggestions or suspicion that this person may have committed an offense. And like I heard the judge said, that judges are not porous because they have a certain amount of money does not suggest they are corrupt. They may have other means of income.
But those means of income too
must be legitimate.
It must be legitimate.
Well,
declared.
That will make me for us to also look at our laws on the issue of declaration of assets. A situation where you declare asset every 4 years gives room for a lot to happen within one declaration and the next. But if it's done periodically, like every 3 months, maybe it will be much easier. But yes, when the judge cannot compel himself to go and do a declaration before it is due. You do it every 4 years. That's what the Constitution has said, or upon leaving office. So I will not, because if I did declaration 2 years ago and I acquire an asset, I won't go and say, look, I have a new asset, because the law does not require me to do that. I think these are some of the laws we should look at and improve them to make them more functional. Because somebody can also acquire those assets, live a life that fritter them away, and by the time it's the next declaration, they are not there. He has dissipated them.
Now let's go back to the Justice Ademola case and the decision reached by the court. One of the things said primarily was that some of the evidence adduced by the prosecution was speculative in nature.
Very speculative. Yeah.
At what point does an evidence presented in the trial become or is considered speculative?
Now, in law, we say that suspicion, no matter how strong, can never grant a conviction. If because I see Utibe wear a nice suit and I say, oh, well, he can't afford it. Journalists are not meant to wear nice suits. So he must have taken a bribe or stolen the money for it. That's speculation. I have to find out, how did he acquire this problem? Did he get the money through corrupt practice? Through a crime? When you base it on a mere conjecture that because he occupies this office, he can't have it, then you speculate. You must try and let the person show. And I always say this, the law is there to help. There's a section of the EFCC Act that allows you to justify your livelihood, more like a personality audit does. Okay, you earn a salary of ₦1 million, but you live in a ₦100 million house. Your children attend schools where they pay in dollars, and you fly business class or first class. Justify to us how you sustain this lifestyle. And there's a section of the Constitution that also lends credence to this that says that a law will not be invalidated merely by putting the proof of certain facts on an accused person. So when you have a combined reading of these laws, it means this is a matter within your personal knowledge, so you should show how you become entitled to it. We should not be in a hurry to go to court. Let the person say, you first of all produce evidence what the person ordinarily, his lifestyle, his income should be like, and then show how he's living far above that income. And the onus shifts to him to show how he's entitled to such a lifestyle. Then where he's unable to, then conclusion may be drawn that the person may be a product of corrupt practice. And we should also model our laws where the state does not have to prove that the money is actually that of corrupt practice, but where the person cannot explain the source of his wealth.
Where a charge is filed, an individual is arrested based on this scenario you've created, and it creates an impression of malice. Are there any remedies left for the victim?
Where the law has room for malicious prosecution, if you've been prosecuted and you feel that there was no basis, they ought to know, they shouldn't have charged it to court. The law gives you a civil remedy, malicious prosecution, action for malicious prosecution against that agency, especially in the case, as we have it in the country, where you're brutalized, if I may use that word in the media, your reputation severely damaged before you're charged to court, the courts not being allowed to do their job before people go to town to allege what you've done and not done. In one of the cases, it was alleged that the money allegedly recovered, as stated in the media, fell much lower than what was alleged in the counts charged in court. I mean, this could be destructive. And these are things we should guard against. I don't like to say this, but in a particular matter I'm involved in, where the money involved is about ₦3 billion, and the prosecutorial agency, in this case the EFCC, keeps making press release that the amount involved is about $36 billion. The court was peeved and they said, look, you should make a retraction of this. But if you want to continue with media trial, but if it's in the court, you have to do accurate reporting of what is happening in the court. And maybe, I don't know why people do it, but maybe to fetter the hands of the court so that the people get acquitted tomorrow or something happens. Say, well, how can people embezzle so much money and the court frees them? The judiciary is our problem. Sometimes you can't help wondering whether the judiciary is not being set up to take the blame for an otherwise incompetent investigation or in some cases prosecution.
All right. What about the pressure on the prosecuting agencies themselves? How do you balance the pressure? Because you have the public interest and demand for corruption to be fought. And a lot of people looking forward to the EFCC, the ICPC, the police to do the job. And you have a president on the one hand who has promised to fight corruption, who people believe can help drive the campaign to fight corruption. Do you find the prosecuting anti-graft agencies here under tremendous pressure to perform or give a semblance of performance?
It worries me that the prosecutorial agencies or the anti-corruption agencies have to be pressurized to work. That is what the law set them up to do. And we must build institutions. We don't need the Buhari administration to drive this process. These bodies are set up in such a way to guarantee a certain level of independence, and they should be able to do this work irrespective of who is there. And which brings me to our failure to build institutions. We build personalities, strong men. And that is why maybe there has been an insistence that a particular person must head the EFCC. It mustn't be him. If you build institutions, any person can be there, and all the staff there will do their work irrespective of who is their chairman, who is not their chairman. There shouldn't be pressure. If they do a thorough work, then they will get results. And what the government should do to show that commitment is to fund these agencies well and to insulate them from any kind of political executive interference and allow them to do their job. I think that's the kind of pressure that should be brought to bear so that they will know that they have all the free hand in the world to do work, and they should have the capacity for forensic investigation so that no matter should get to court without them being sure that at least there's a 70% chance of the matter succeeding in court.
Out of the over 15 judges who were said to either have been arrested or under investigation for alleged corrupt practices, so far I think just about 4, so thereabout, have been charged to court. Of course, one has been acquitted by the court, talking about Justice Adeniyi Ademola. 7 months after arrest, and some of them who had been detained as well. What does it say that 7 months after they've still not been charged to court?
I wonder, because some of them were actually indicted by the NJC. And I remember that when this started, the NJC was blamed for the raid, on the ground that its inactivity gave rise to the raid. And yet 3 of such persons who NJC indicted, who going from the facts of their case ought to have been charged to court, are not yet charged to court, except I heard the former CJ of Enugu State who has been dragged before the court. Now, one of them has also been freed by the NJC, that's Justice Nnamdi Dimba. Justice Okoro is facing trial in no court, and yet his lordship cannot sit. It makes you wonder at the level of investigation, at the level of evaluation of facts that went into this matter before press releases were made, news items were made out of these stories, and how even the person that the NJC said should be sent to police for investigation till today is yet to be tried. It makes you wonder what kind of anti-corruption fight we have here. Okay, they are now free to charge them. The NJC is not in their way. What's keeping them? And like you said, 7 months down the line, a judge's reputation is an issue. He doesn't even have any charge in court against him to know what to meet, and yet he's perceived to be corrupt because an agency of the state has declared him so. And the same agency has not charged him to court, and the same agency does not have the presence of her to say, oh, probably we made a mistake here. There's no case for him to answer. And this is a situation we have to contend with in the fight against corruption. It must be humane. The state must not destroy the reputation of its citizens and the platform of fighting corruption. The state should also not glorify corrupt persons, and the state should not also shield corrupt persons. But the state should also not make the judiciary the fall guy of improper investigation or improper prosecution or inability to produce sufficient evidence that will make a court come to the conclusion that the person's charged otherwise has a case to answer.
We have people who have been in detention for over 14 months already. You have Sambo Dasuki, who has been in detention for that long. You have other people who have been put into detention. And you have also the prosecuting agencies citing Section 2931 of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act to justify this practice. At the same time, on the other hand, you find people who say, no, this provision is inconsistent with Chapter 4 of the Constitution. How do you reconcile this?
I don't want to argue on whether Section 293 is inconsistent with the Constitution, but assuming, for purposes of argument, we are to concede it is not. That section requires you to bring that person before a court before securing an order to remand him, and that order should not be for more than 14 days. Now, if you read further down that section, it gives the court an opportunity to even hear from that person to know whether to make that order. But what do we have? We have magistrates, judges signing this order in chambers without the person being produced to them, before them, without any form of evidence being presented before the court as to whether to make this order. And one may, for purposes of argument, say that the courts have done this wrongdoing to aid the work of the investigative agencies to secure remand, as unconstitutional and as unlawful as it is. But yet, it is not how long you keep a person that makes your investigation a success. The state should not be on a witch hunt, on a punishment mission. Let us keep you out of circulation. you should gather enough facts before even making an arrest. But it's only in Nigeria, once a petition is received against you, the first step that is made is to arrest you. And which is why you see most of the times, the evidence used to secure people are based on statements written by people, not proper professional investigative work.
How do we get the public to restore, have confidence in the courts themselves as well? We've seen a judiciary that has in the past 2 years received a lot of bashing from different sectors. Right now, before a case even goes to court, there is a court of public opinion that has already made out its judgment on whether a person is guilty or not, based on what has been put out there on the pages of the newspaper and in the media, and eventually gets to court and a decision is given otherwise. If we continue to see the kind of decisions we are seeing in the past 2 weeks, where persons who have been perceived to have corruptly enriched themselves getting discharged by the court, what effect would that have, or what would be the public perception on the judiciary itself?
Well, I'll be unable to say, but the point I'll make, at least strongly make, is that no investigative agency should deliberately plant facts or stories in the media that does not bear out the true state of affairs. And the public runs with the story they read in newspapers, online media, social media. They may never get to find out that that has no relationship with what you're charged with. A certain judge was planted a story in many online media that he was a distributor. He frequently traveled to Ghana and Benin to go and bring in money and use as give as bribe to judges of the Federal High Court. Till today, he's not been charged to court. The public probably perceives him as a corrupt person who is actually a distributor. And nobody has indicted that judge. Nobody has charged him to court. There's no indication there was any follow-up investigation on that. So we can cure this public perception by refusing to allow falsehood to be fed to the public, by making sure that our investigative agencies are professional and they respect the fact that they will damage people's dignity and human feelings by planting falsehood against them, and by not rushing to the media to compete with space for politicians in spreading stories, and most times falsehood. That the only facts that they should put out in the media is what they're able to prove in the courts, and allow the courts to do their jobs, and not try to pull the courts over a barrel, making it difficult for them to move because a wrong story has been fed to the public that is actually presented in the courts.
Mazi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so very much.
Well, failure is said to be the best recipe for success. Perhaps the advisory committee will find a need for introspection, learn lessons, be more methodical and less political. Well, that's our final thought on Project Justice this week. Do follow us on our various social media platforms at ProJustice Live on Twitter, Project Justice on Facebook and on YouTube. On behalf of the entire team, thanks for staying with us. I am Mutuba Omar and see you next week.